to Raja Dharma. So it is a part of Mahabharata where Viśvaprasana tells many essential Raja Dharma things to Yudhishthira. So when I learned it, it was very interesting for me, and I always thought how could we implement those principles or those things in our present state. So, and also we have been learning about Ramayana. So I'm interested in how Rama Rājya was, how was Rama Rājya, and how can we again bring Rama Rājya?
Thank you, Anusha. We heard Ashok ji yesterday. So, and also Bhimasima-ji. Dr. IVNS Raju is amongst us. Dr. IVNS Raju, could you please share your thoughts with the group? Dr. Raju? Dr. Raju?
Yeah, am I audible to you, please?
Yeah, you are now audible, please.
Yeah, in fact, as I mentioned in my response to the email, I would like to know the, the practical implications of establishing Rama Rājya in the contemporary democratic setup that we have, and the kind of politicians we are having, and the kind of, people representation that we have had, which is allowing people to contest and become MPs and MLAs several times. Say, for example, Ram Nabi Azad. He has been the MP, he has been the CM, and he has. I'm not talking about a Muslim leader, and Chidambaram, various other people are also doing the same thing. So, if this kind of program gives a kind of clues, probably we'll be able to share it in the social media that yes, we have a system, and we can certainly recommend the system to the government of India. The really serious politicians in BJP, which is apparently said to be the Hindu party, but unfortunately, I'm not able to see anything, which is going to protect Sanatana Dharma. So, under these circumstances, I feel that this kind of a course is going to help people who have enrolled for this course to do what next they will be able to do.
Thank you, Dr. Raju. We have amongst us Sri Kaushik Dhulipala. I suppose he is joined by his father, Sri T.V. Ramana. Sir, could you please share your thoughts and also about yourself to the group? So kindly unmute yourself.
ఏంటమ్మా అవునమ్మా అవును చెప్పమ్మా వినపడుతుంది టీ పెడుతుందమ్మా టీ ఇంకా తాగలేదు
Kaushik Dhulipala, Sri Kaushik Dhulipala, please. Please unmute yourself. You are muted. Please unmute yourself.
Hello. Hello.
Hello. Namaskara. Please. You are now audible.
Yeah. Okay. So I have already sent 3 questions to you, and just now Mr. Srinivas has spoken. So the question is how to take it forward and make the politicians understand the need for this Rama Rājya. So it will be like a revolution, and everybody should be made to understand the need of it and we should go back to the Rama Rājya by spreading the message to as many people as possible. This is a very good initiative being done by Mr. Pranav. I really appreciate. I wish a lot of people join in this meet. In fact, I tried to send this particular message to some of my groups. I don't know whether anybody is joining from those groups. I really do not know. But it's a very, very good initiative. Being a young person, if you are initiating this, let it be spread to all the youngsters. Perhaps they will be able to take it forward much faster than the present senior people. Because there may be some, I don't say it is lethargy or anything else, some moroseness among the senior people, but the youngsters, once it is touching their hearts, they will take it very fast and forward very quickly also. And they don't mind being open on any issues. So I would like this message to be spread to everyone, and it should reach the politicians as fast as possible to make the Rama Rājya to come as quickly as possible.
Thank you, sir. We are having, say, quite a few young people as part of this group, and we do hope that we'll be able to reach out to many more in due course of time. Yeah.
But I appreciate very much. I appreciate very much the initiative, and I wish maximum number of people join this meet in the days to come.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, we are from my side. I'll do my best to see that more number of people join in the meet.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Sri Kumar is also amongst us. Sir.
Namaskaraha. My name is Balasubramaniam. I am a chartered accountant. It is that Kumar is my pet name, and that is the Gmail ID that is required for Google. So I am a student. I claim to be a student of corporate law and corporate governance. And I believe that every individual has a role to play as a citizen of this country. And we have to create our own methods, our own corporations, our own means of ruling ourselves. And this is a very good initiative which you have taken up, and let us see how it goes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. We do hope to take up some of the questions that you have posed as part of your write-up. We have amongst us a young boy, 12th standard student, Prabhanjana. Prabhanjana, could you please state your interest in the course?
Yeah, no. So as come to the Rama Rājya, I believe that the most, when it comes, the most important point of the society will be how the government runs and how the government takes up everything, because that's where every other, it might be the trade, it might be commerce, or it might be sports and everything else. They all run under the government. So first of all, learning how did the Rama Rājya came up, like this this was considered to be one of the best governments, you can say, which can help us in this times. And yeah, this can basically give an idea about how can I want to actually come out with an political thing itself. So I want to be a minister or something. So that would help me in understanding how can I do the same.
I request all the elders in the group to do bless Prabhanjana, who is a young boy who is desirous of say trying to change what things are in the world right now. We have amongst us Srimati Sridevi-ji. Sridevi-ji, could you please say a few words to this group?
Namaskar. I am Sridevi Padaki. Basically, I am a teacher by profession, and I would like to know more about what Rama Rājya is, how can we implement it in the society, what are the youngsters thinking about, irrespective of the caste, creed or color. So that interests me the more. I would like to gain more of knowledge. Thank you.
We have Swapna Gangadharanji also with us. So, ma'am, could you please also share your thoughts? Swapna ji, you are inaudible. Could you please check your microphone?
In the meantime, we can invite another person.
Continue with our introductions, possibly in our session. Yeah, so I think today I thought we should as well try and address this concern for Rama Rājya, and also I do intend to bring to your attention a particular remarkable assertion and also an advice that I happened to hear from the Jagadguru of Shankaracharya of Sringeri, Sri Bharati Tīrtha Svāmī, very recently on the question of Rama Rājya. And his point was quite simple. Many people believe that those who are going to earn a lot of money, or those who would have a lot of wealth, are the only people who are respected and who are certainly seen to be the ones who are to be considered as emulatable in the society. But this particular impression is false. Even to this day, those who are sincere, those who are honest, and those who are truthful about whatever they do, they are respected by their peers. And the only concern, in fact, the kind of feel that I have is that those who have this kind of respect for those who are honest, they don't feel it an obligation onto themselves that they also be like these honest people. So if only that ever happens, then what we'll have is Rama Rājya. I'm deliberately trying to bring out the varieties of ways in which Rama Rājya as a specific usage in our own language, not just one language, across the languages of the country is used. And today I intend to start with a particular reference from one of the foremost journalists and also a remarkable thinker on the political scene of the country during the British times as well as during the early years of the India's independence. I am referring to Sri Durga Das, who has written a work. It's his memoirs. The book is called India from Curzon to Nehru and After. So in his memoirs, he has something very interesting to state. I'm sharing that particular point that he actually stated, which I thought must be read out to as well bring to you an impression. So I hope you are all able to see this excerpt that I am presenting. So this is from the chapter 2, and the part 1 of it is the social and religious milieu, blessings of the Raj. Now, Durgadas states, one's memories of childhood are often nostalgic, invested with an illusory romance. But viewing things objectively, the very early years of the 20th century formed the golden period of the British Raj. People enjoyed peace and contentment in a climate of social security. This is actually from 1900 to 1905 that is being referred to. To the intelligent and adventurous, opportunity beckoned with open arms. Anyway, I cannot recall a single reason for being dissatisfied with the conditions of my childhood. My father's standing in the village was high. In the schoolroom, he often spelled out the blessings of the Raj. My grandmother appeared to hold the alien ruler in the same high regard. Many of her bedtime stories revolved around Sikha Shahi, the Sikh misrule, and the mutiny, of which we now speak as the first war of India's independence. She was all praise for the Ramraj of Malka, Queen Victoria. Please note the reference to Ramraj of Malka. Malka is Mallika, the queen, and the reference was to Queen Victoria. And this is, as you would be aware, it was in the 1858 that the declaration of Queen Victoria came in, and that was the basis on which most of India's national movement was erected. So the Ramraj of Malka was seen during the days of Lord Curzon, is what we find Durgadas state. And I have a few more points that I thought must be noticed in what he asserts in this chapter. Grandma had, however, what we would now describe as superstitious taboos. She would caution me, for instance, against all social contacts with the Firangi, foreigner. He was an untouchable who ate beef. If I were ever to shake hands with a white man, I must cleanse myself of the pollution 7 times over. Never eat in a Brahmin's house, she would say, with a warning shake of her old finger. A Kshatriya, must not partake of food given away in charity. Never eat with a Jat, a peasant cultivator either, for he does not conform to the strict code of cleanliness enjoined upon the higher caste. As for the Muslim or the lowly Chamar or sweeper, the eatables that he touched must be thrown away. Despite the seemingly senseless rigors of such injunctions, life flowed smoothly in the village. The various castes understood the taboos and respected them. Let us emphasize this statement. The various castes understood the taboos and respected them. My father was no slave to these social barriers. His relations with Muslim families were cordial. On feast days, he would send them cooked food, and they would reciprocate on their Eid day or other festive occasion by instructing Hindu shopkeepers to supply us with grain and sweets. Please note, the taboos and respected them is actually shown and exemplified in the statement where the Muslims reciprocated on their Eid day. The Hindus could as well send cooked food, whereas the Muslims instructed Hindu shopkeepers to supply the Hindus with grain and sweets. At his house, Hindus and Muslims would squat on the same carpet, the latter withdrawing discreetly for a moment when a Hindu wanted a drink of water. My father had no scruples either about visiting an untouchable's house to persuade him to send his children to school. In these troubled days, my thoughts often flash back to a vivid picture of the Hindu-Muslim harmony of long years ago. Arrayed on 2 sides are long-bearded Muslim divines engaged in hot disputation over the precise interpretation of an injunction in the Holy Quran. The arbiter seated at the head of the assemblage is a Hindu. The arguments go backward and forward, and at the end, my father pronounces the verdict. Nodding their heads in amiable agreement, the divines depart, each with a reverential salam. Incidents like this underscore the mutual respect and understanding that nourished a climate of tolerance and harmony in rural India over the decades. The basic tenet of the British Raj was not to interfere with the customs and traditions of the people, and the people, for their part, regarded the alien government as a source of security and the guarantor of freedom for each to pursue his individual vocation. I'd like to repeat this paragraph once again. The basic tenet of the British Raj was not to interfere with the customs and traditions of the people, and the people, for their part, regarded the alien government as a source of security and the guarantor of freedom for each to pursue his individual vocation. It's quite meaningful to also continue with what Durgadas says about the beliefs and superstitions of the village, the Punjabi village that he was part of. If the elders were to call down a benediction upon a boy, they would invariably say, "May God make you a Thanedar or a Patwari." Maybe today they'll say, "Become a civil servant." The embodiment of power and authority. The Thanedar was a sub-inspector of police, a local potentate, and the Patwari wielded great influence as the village revenue accountant. Even the words of reproof were significant. If someone was fractious or arrogant, the villagers would remark acidly that he was becoming a Lat Sahib or Nawab. The Lat Sahib was the governor of the province and the ultimate repository of governmental authority, and the Nawab, the highest symbol of feudal grandeur. Now, all this defined the horizons of the villagers' thinking. As a very important observation here, the turban is just the kind of protection that the most sensitive part of one's anatomy needs against the severity of the Punjab weather. But far from those far-off days, there was more to it. To go about bareheaded was to proclaim oneself bereft of all shame, to show brazen disrespect to your elders. The turban was the mark of dignity and honor. There was no personal insult more unpardonable than to dislodge it from your opponent's head. An adversary who threatened to snatch off your turban off was obviously intent on humiliating you. By the turn of the century, however, imported caps had invaded the countryside and boys were permitted to wear these in place of the more cumbersome headgear. But the taboo on uncovered heads was not to vanish for a long time. Word was passed around in whispers among the boys that a Bengali adult who went about bareheaded was in town. Stirred by curiosity, we flocked to his house. He was not only bareheaded, he ate eggs. In our eyes, a sin, and spoke in English. That he was a Bengali was in itself intriguing enough. Except as a province marked in the atlas, what did Bengal mean to us then? It was a narrow world we lived in. Contact outside our own small region was restricted. All marriages, for instance, were contracted within a radius of 10 to 20 miles. Seldom would one look for a match across the nearby river. If that was done, it was suspected that there was some blemish the parties sought to hide from the critical scrutiny of their neighbors. For all that, the concept of India as our home and motherland was implanted in our minds and nourished by the two epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, and by the tales of pilgrims who had devoutly journeyed to the four corners of the country, Haridwar in the north, Rameshwaram and Kanyakumari at the southern tip of the peninsula, Dwarka to the west, and Puri and Kashi far to the east. He continues in this chapter by speaking of the learning of the rudiments of Dharma. Learning the rudiments of Dharma. Long before I entered my teens, I was to absorb the rudimentary principles of Dharma at the knees of my parents. Dharma, inadequately rendered into English as the right path and righteousness. Dharma embraced in the child's comprehension, religion and its prescribed ritual, a code of conduct of which cleanliness was an inescapable part and a certain basic philosophy. First came personal hygiene and self-discipline. We were to cast off our footwear before we crossed the threshold of the house. The daily ablutions were carefully laid down and enforced. The teeth had to be brushed with the twigs of certain trees, and the ritual of washing and bathing was exacting. Food was invested with a measure of sanctity, and so was the kitchen where it was prepared and served. Discipline was instilled into our minds through elementary lessons in the law of karma, reward based on deeds. If things went wrong, one was paying for wrongs done in a past life. If one prospered, one was reaping the fruits of good deeds performed previously. My mother was my early mentor in these mysteries. Tell a lie or steal, and you will be born to poor parents in your next life. If you are cruel to animals, you might be born into the animal kingdom yourself. Discharge your duty and act righteously, and you will be rewarded in this life and in the next as well. Better than precept was the example the elders set. My father, for instance, would never fail to throw crumbs to pariah dogs or cast a morsel on the roof for the birds. My mother would invariably set apart a piece of chapati, bake it half a flat bread, for the cow before she sat down to her meal. Charity and kindness to all life around us is part of the obligation we owe the Creator. Trees too are sentient beings, my father said. And this is much before Jagdish Chandra Bose had to prove to the rest of the world, and must be treated with solicitude. Never disturb a tree after nightfall, he cautioned me. It is asleep. Religion, where it was a matter of ritual, was largely the preserve of the priests who officiated at all festivities and ceremonies. but the teaching of it was principally in the hands of pious women, well-versed in scriptural lore, often widows whose austerity of life was a byword among us, or of itinerant monks who roamed for alms from door to door, chanting sacred songs. I suppose this is worth repeating again, but the teaching of the rituals and religion was principally in the hands of pious women, well-versed in scriptural lore, often widows whose austerity of life was a byword among us, or of itinerant monks who roamed for alms from door to door, chanting sacred songs. There was a little distinction between the holy books of the Hindus and the Sikhs. In fact, the first texts I heard intoned as I sat in my mother's lap were from the Guru Granth Sahib, the holy book of the Sikhs. Muslim mendicants and peers, saints were held in no less esteem. Sufism was in fact closely akin to Hindu philosophy. Much of what we thus imbibed was, of course, beyond our understanding. Our acceptance of it was instinctive, but it did affect our minds. The law of karma gave one the feeling that yesterday is linked with today, even as today with tomorrow, in a never-ending cycle. One sensed too the underlying oneness of all God's infinite creation, and all around one noticed how this spiritual outlook tempered the rigors of the caste system and leavened social life with humaneness. I think this is something to be very importantly seen with respect to what we are going to see today. Caste consciousness can be a great evil, but in those ancient days, people had learned to accept life without resentment. It was not merely fatalism. In some degree, at least, it was rooted in in spirituality. One cannot pin down in precise words. Take the case of the untouchable sweeper woman of the village. She called from door to door at midday, collecting the food set apart for her as religiously as it was laid aside for the cow. The lowly outcast thus experienced a sense of participation in the good things of life. At this moment, I'd say any kind of responses that people have from the excerpt that I've just read before I say a few comments and also move on to the next point that I intend to bring to your attention. Sir, Dr. Raju, please unmute yourself.
Can I say a few words, please?
Please do.
Yeah. Today being Madhva Navami, I would like to readily, I would say that it has come to my mind that this Swadharma of a person, Paramadharma of a person, Acharya Madhva has given in a simple shloka, which you have rightly given illustrations how the caste system has accepted the realities of the dharma and they followed it. He has mentioned very clearly in a simple shloka saying that Svavihita karma, Svavihita vrutya, bhaktya, Bhagavadaradhanam, Sayeva, Paramodharmaha. And he has mentioned very clearly Svavihita vrutya. And when he says the vritti is nothing but the kuladharma or the dharma in which a person has born. When he adhere to that one, he will be doing the vihita karma, which is really qualified for him to do that one. And when he does that one, it is says bhaktya. Not here, the meaning of bhakti is not the devotion, but the passion with which he does that one. So Acharya Madhva has already given a wonderful dictum of understanding what is the paramadharma of each person in any caste. I would like to submit this to the August gathering of this meeting so that Acharya Madhva's philosophy is understood as establishing realistic theism with dharma. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, sir. I guess some of the things that you say are certainly things which are heavily contested. And it is for this precise reason that we need to as well understand what is the contestation. I've actually emphasized a few points from Durgadas's reminiscences of his own childhood. First one, of course, I've actually tried to show you that the conception of Ramaraj is not something which is very distant. It was actually understood in rather simple terms of that kind of a rule where people were allowed to as well pursue what they were actually receiving from the tradition as their respective dharmas. This is something that certainly undergoes a shift just about 50 years later. And the Constitution of India has been one great kind of disruption. And many people would like to believe that it is transformative in its nature and reformative in its content, and specifically reforming of Hindu religion and also of Hindu dharma was one of the key kind of consensus that was built around the Constituent Assembly. And even if there were people who were actually not so very convinced of it, the majority was of that kind. And that is something that must first be, say, understood before we actually start speaking of the sense of Rama Rājya as understood as something that is to do with Dharma Nityaha Prajastasan. The sense of Dharma, which say, yeah, I have a student raise a point. So Prabhanjana, you had something to say? Yeah, okay, so let us move on. I'd like to bring to your attention the submission that the speech that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar made to the Constituent Assembly. I actually referred to it yesterday, specifically with respect to how did the illustrations come to the Constitution. So here I am going to show you from the Constituent Assembly debates, a very important section where the draft Constitution, because of the extreme kind of negative comments that were actually thrown at the draft Constitution, there was a spirited defense made by Dr. Ambedkar, and that is something which is very worthwhile. In my note yesterday, I sent to you a speech of late Sri Dharampal, whose birth centenary is currently being celebrated, wherein he actually specified that the Indian state, post its independence, should have possibly, say, tried to base itself on Indian genius and not tried to think of the borrowings from elsewhere. And this is a point that we shall certainly see with sufficient attention. So please take a look at this particular statement that there's a question. Sridevi-ji, could you please unmute and ask the same? So from what I've actually read, it says that there's a specific point. It was about how would youngsters read this? I would actually try to think that as specifically mentioned in my note, first, any youngster must actually be present a youngster should be able to first learn, and most of these thoughts which are currently being brought to the attention aren't actually taught to youngsters these days, and that itself is an issue. So how do we actually try and bring the different dimensions of the thought is a point which requires not just, say, individual effort, but a collective effort to start rethinking about what is the unfinished agenda that I tried to bring to your attention of the India's national movement. So here, I hope you are able to see these. I have not yet started the specific section from where I intend to bring to your attention what the Honorable Dr. B.R. Ambedkar had to say in defense of the charge that the Constitution of India is something that has actually picked a lot from the 1935 Government of India Act and what it has actually done in terms of where it moves and so on. So it is from this point that I shall be reading aloud, because each of these are a lot to do with, say, this particular desire that this group has with respect to Rama Rājya. It is said that there is nothing new in the draft constitution, that about half of it has been copied from the Government of India Act of 1935, and that the rest of it has been borrowed from the constitutions of other countries. Very little of it can claim originality. One likes to ask whether there can be anything new in a constitution framed at this hour in the history of the world. More than 100 years have rolled over when the first written constitution was drafted. It has been followed by many countries reducing their constitutions to writing. What the scope of a constitution should be has long been settled. I'd repeat this. Please notice Dr. Ambedkar felt that what the scope of a constitution should be has long been settled. Similarly, what are the fundamentals of a constitution are recognized all over the world. Given these facts, all constitutions in their main provisions must look similar. The only new things, if there can be any, in a constitution framed so late in the day are the variations made to remove the faults and to accommodate it to the needs of the country. So I am going to show what are the changes made in Indian constitution that were made to accommodate to the needs of the country, that shows a specific sense of past which requires to be understood for us to even speak of Rama Rājya today. The charge of producing a blind copy of the constitutions of other countries is based, I am sure, on an inadequate study of the constitution. I have shown what is new in the draft constitution, and I am sure that those who have studied other constitutions and who are prepared to consider the matter dispassionately will agree that the drafting committee, in performing its duty, has not been guilty of such blind and slavish imitation as it is presented to be. As to the accusation that the draft constitution has produced a good part of the provisions of the Government of India Act 1935, I make no apologies. There is nothing to be ashamed of in borrowing. It involves no plagiarism. Nobody holds any patent rights in the fundamental ideas of a constitution. What I am sorry about is that the provisions taken from the Government of India Act 1935 relate mostly to the details of administration. I agree that administrative details should have no place in the constitution. This is a reference to the inclusion of Union Public Services Commission and the protection offered to the officers of UPSC in the constitution. I wish very much that the drafting committee could see its way to avoid their inclusion in the constitution. But this is to be said on the necessity which justifies their inclusion. Grote, the historian of Greece, has said that the diffusion of constitutional morality, I repeat, the diffusion of constitutional morality. Please remember this term, constitutional morality. If you are constantly looking at newspapers, you might find a repeated use of this term, constitutional morality, come about in all newspapers in all languages with very strange kind of translations also in native languages. The diffusion of constitutional morality, not merely among the majority of any community, but throughout the whole, is the indispensable condition of a government at once free and peaceable. Since even any powerful and obstinate minority may render the working of a free institution impracticable without being strong enough to conquer ascendancy for themselves. So if in case you have, say, any kind of a system, then it must have certain kind of grounding in the moral mind of the people who are following it. And there's a sense of the constitutional morality that is actually referred to by Grote, the historian of Greece. By constitutional morality, Grote meant a paramount reverence for the forms of the constitution. Please underline the term forms of the constitution, enforcing obedience to authority, acting under and within these forms, yet combined with the habit of open speech, of action subject only to definite legal control, and unrestrained censure of those very authorities as to all their public acts combined, too, with a perfect confidence in the bosom of every citizen amidst the bitterness of party contest that forms of the constitution will not be less sacred in the eyes of his opponents than in his own. A paramount reverence for the forms of the Constitution has been called for. And what are the forms of the Constitution that we know of today? If at all you actually speak of the protesting that people may have against the government decisions, then forms of the Constitution disallow a person to go on a fast unto death, a person to disrupt the way in which the society functions, normal function, meaning that, say, dharnas or strikes and shutting down of business activity, these are against the forms of the Constitution. The forms of the Constitution have a certain kind of an approach where if at all you have an issue, then you actually raise it with the legislator concerned, and the legislator ought to raise it appropriately with the executive and the government and ensure that what is the kind of change that one requires to see is brought to action. So paramount reverence for the forms of the Constitution is spoken of. And we do find that if at all there's a paramount reverence for the forms of the Constitution, then most of what we today see as politics as usual is something which may not possibly be in vogue. Now, I do want to bring this point to attention. While everybody recognizes the necessity of the diffusion of constitutional morality for the peaceful working of a democratic constitution, there are two things interconnected with it, which are not, unfortunately, generally recognized. One is that the form of administration has a close connection with the form of the constitution. The form of the administration must be appropriate to and in the same sense as the form of the constitution. The other is that it is perfectly possible to pervert the constitution without changing its form by merely changing the form of the administration and to make it inconsistent and opposed to the spirit of the constitution. It follows that it is only where people are saturated with constitutional morality, such as the one described by Grote, the historian, that one can take the risk of omitting from the constitution details of administration and leaving it for the legislature to prescribe them. The question is, can we presume such a diffusion of constitutional morality? Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. I repeat, constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that our people have yet to learn it. Democracy in India is only a top dressing on an Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic. I'd like to repeat this point. Democracy in India is only a top dressing on an Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic. So these are contestations which have actually been debated within the Constituent Assembly. And I'll also show you what were the kind of changes that were brought in post the debating of what Dr. Ambedkar said in this defense of the draft constitution. Now, there's one more point that I intend to bring to your attention. In these circumstances, it is wiser not to trust the legislature to prescribe forms of administration. This is the justification for incorporating them in the constitution. Another criticism against the draft constitution is that no part of it represents the ancient polity of India. If you would like to think of Rama Rājya as an ancient polity of India, then the criticism is something that needs to be, certainly taken with sufficient kind of attention. It is said that the new constitution should have been drafted on the ancient Hindu model of a state, and that instead of incorporating Western theories, the new constitution should have been raised and built upon village panchayats and district panchayats. There are others who have taken a more extreme view. They do not want any central or provincial governments. They just want India to contain so many village governments. The love of the intellectual Indians for the village community is, of course, infinite, if not pathetic. There was a laughter in the hall. It is largely everything that they want within themselves. It is largely due to the fulsome praise bestowed upon it by Metcalfe. Metcalfe was a historian who wrote a book on the village communities of India. And that informed most of the English-educated leaders of those times. Though, of course, you had in Mahatma Gandhi, who traveled and crisscrossed across the country to directly meet people of India. So therefore, his learning wasn't just about what was actually written in foreign books, but he had his own kind of an estimate of what he actually thought it to be. So that's something that must be kept in mind. It is largely due to the fulsome praise bestowed upon it by Metcalfe, who described them as little republics having nearly everything that they want within themselves and almost independent of any foreign relations. The existence of these village communities, each one forming a separate little state in itself, has, according to Metcalfe, contributed more than any other cause to the preservation of the people of India through all the revolutions and changes which they have suffered, and is in a high degree conducive to their happiness and to the enjoyment of a great portion of the freedom and independence. No doubt, the village communities have lasted where nothing else lasts. But those who take pride in the village communities do not care to consider what little part they have played in the affairs and the destiny of the country, and why. Their part in the destiny of the country has been well described by Metcalfe himself, who says, "Dynasty after dynasty tumbles down. Revolution succeeds to revolution. Hindu, Pathan, Mughal, Maratha, Sikh, English are all masters in turn, but the village communities remain the same. In times of trouble, they arm and fortify themselves. A hostile army passes through the country. The village communities collect their little cattle within their walls and let the enemy pass unprovoked. Such is the part the village communities have played in the history of their country. Knowing this, what pride can one feel in them?" I repeat, knowing this, what pride can one feel in them? That they have survived through all vicissitudes may be a fact, but mere survival has no value. The question is on what plane they have survived, surely on a low, on a selfish level. I hold that these village republics have been the ruination of India. I am therefore surprised that those who condemn provincialism and communalism should come forward as champions of the village. What is the village but a sink of localism, a den of ignorance, narrow-mindedness, and communalism? I am glad that the draft constitution has discarded the village and adopted the individual as its unit. By the way, there was a question posed by one of the people who possibly isn't in the current group, but the key point to be noticed is that he did ask the question on how is it that one is going to discuss about village and the individual, what ought to be the unit of how we consider the way in which we imagine the sense of constituting the state and the nation in the country. So I would like to repeat this particular point. What is the village but a sink of localism, a den of ignorance, narrow-mindedness, and communalism? Now, to add to this, this is possibly where I'd like to stop this particular reference to Dr. Ambedkar's defense of the draft constitution. The draft constitution is also criticized because of the safeguards it provides for minorities. In this, the drafting committee has no responsibility. It follows the decisions of the Constituent Assembly. Speaking for myself, I have no doubt that the Constituent Assembly has done wisely in providing such safeguards for minorities as it has done. In this country, both the minorities and the majorities have followed a wrong path. It is wrong for the majority to deny the existence of minorities. It is equally wrong for the minorities to perpetuate themselves. A solution must be found which will serve a double purpose. It must recognize the existence of the minorities to start with. It must also be such that it will enable majorities and minorities to merge someday into one. I'd like to repeat this once again. It must also be such that it will enable majorities and minorities to merge someday into one. How does this happen? Dr. Ambedkar did have a solution, and the Uniform Civil Code was one such thing that he did dream of. And the first act towards the Uniform Civil Code was to reform the Hindu marriage system, and that is part of the Hindu Code Bill. So this is something that we necessarily would have to discuss when we have to talk about identity today, and the question of the memory as well as the conflict with the identity that comes with sense of past from one's own. So if you notice, say, in my write-up on the course note, I've actually referred to sense of past as inherited and sense of past as that which is taught. So sense of past as inherited and sense of past as that which is taught are in conflict with each other, specifically when it comes to a certain kind of aspiration to actually start thinking of finding that majorities and minorities to merge someday into one. So what does that merging mean is something that one has to as well reflect on. We'll come to these questions certainly. The solution proposed by the Constituent Assembly is to be welcomed because it is a solution which serves this twofold purpose. To diehards who have developed a kind of fanaticism against minority protection, I would like to say two things. One is that minorities are an explosive force which, if it erupts, can blow up the whole fabric of the state. The history of Europe bears ample and appalling testimony to this fact. The other is that the minorities in India have agreed to place their existence in the hands of the majority. In the history of negotiations for preventing the partition of Ireland, Redmond said to Carson, "Ask for any safeguard you like for the Protestant minority, but let us have a united Ireland." Carson's reply was, "Damn your safeguards. We don't want to be ruled by you." No minority in India has taken this stand. They have loyally accepted the rule of the majority, which is basically a communal majority and not a political majority. I repeat, they have loyally accepted the rule of the majority, which is basically a communal majority and not a political majority. It is for the majority to realize its duty not to discriminate against minorities. Whether the minorities will continue or will vanish must depend upon this habit of the majority. The moment the majority loses the habit of discriminating against the minorities can have no ground to exist. They will vanish. There are quite a few insights that are provided by the Vice and Honorable Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, and there are several points that require, say, very critical reflection. And if one were to actually understand what is that one got to see about the way in which the Indian National Congress tried to rule over India, it was actually trying to create a political majority and not a communal majority. And which is one reason why it would like to call that the efforts of creating a united Hindutva is something which is a creation of a communal majority, which is what is the kind of assumption on which you find the majority-minority discourse rest in the draft constitution's making. I have actually brought to attention several questions, all of which are actually directly related to the specific question of what we are dealing with. I hope, say, if there are any points, I'd like to say, listen to any of your questions or say thoughts before moving on to the Constitution of India and seeing how this actually translated to specific articles. So if there aren't any, I'd continue with the point about the Constitution of India. So let us as well look up what are some of the very specific, unique aspects of the Constitution of India. I have downloaded this from the India Code website, legislative.gov.in. Please do so. And this is something which needs to be often checked in order to see how it is updated often with all the amendments which are kept in the Constitution. So there is, I'd only look at the contents. See, in this course, we've actually spoken of the points about time, space, memory, and identity. Now, what is the difference between space and place is actually something that needs to be known. A place happens when you actually name a space. If you give a space some name, then it is called a place. And when you name something, then it acquires all the kind of baggage that that name offers. The baggage could be good, bad, worse, but naming is a very serious exercise. Of late, we may find that, say, the naming exercise isn't possibly done seriously enough, but those who are from Indian tradition would actually note that Yaskacharya made a very important point. He said that amongst language, we have four parts: Nama, Akhyata, Upasarga, Nipata, of which Nama is important because Sattva Pradhanani Namani, Bhava Pradhanam Akhyatam. So this is a thematic and methodological aspect that we repeatedly say come across. The point about the fact on the specific aspect of naming is something that is a big political aspect as well. So if you notice or follow the newspapers, the kind of discourse that happens on changing the name of Allahabad to Prayagraj becomes a very serious issue. To think of Bangalore to Bengaluru may not have actually has had a serious kind of a reflection, but it also is highly bringing in the sense of the local thought into the name. So when we have to speak of sense of past as in the text of the constitution, wherever you find a name that is present, please note that it has a great degree of past that it is actually conveying. And this goes also to the absence of the names which are not mentioned in the constitution. I remember in my first interaction with students of Purna Pramati, there was a very important question that a young, and this was about the list of languages that are actually listed. The boy comes from the Udupi region, and his mother tongue is Tulu. So he asked, why isn't Tulu not part of the schedule in which all the languages are listed? And I felt that a perceptive question did come in. And that way speaking, if at all you have names which are not specified in the Constitution of India, you will find such kind of names included only when there are agitations that happen in the country to also get it included. Now that is actually bread and butter for the politics as on today. And I could possibly not be wrong at all if at all I say that in Rama Rājya, we would actually expect that one would not wait till somebody agitates, because this is something that is a given. If at all we have to say that the Constitution of India ought to reflect the whole of the diversity of India. It is not a point of generating politics, creating identities. And one need not actually create specific instance of politics on the identities which aren't currently present and thereby gain power. But democratic politics, specifically being the adversarial politics that it is, has possibly meant that these things, though they are known to the knowledgeable people in the country, it doesn't happen. And how does this come to change is a point that we can deliberate on, but I want you to keep this in mind. Now, the point on the citizenship is again something that does speak of the citizenship by birth. And you also have references to those who are migrated to India from Pakistan. So specifically the entire citizenship section. And for those of you who have actually observed the kind of agitations that happened around Citizenship Amendment Act, it actually goes to that question of the schism which still exists in the hearts of several Indians, of the partitioning of the undivided India. And that is something that we haven't yet come to terms with, nor have we seen a path ahead to see what is the way in which we reconstitute ourselves. So this is something that also must be discussed. We, of course, come to this point also understanding what Pakistan means in the sense in which we have to understand specifically dharma when translated by Sri H.V. Kamath as religion, would also call for us to be aware of what is the sense in which this Pakistan as an idea plays a role in Islam. And there have been several studies which also require to be studied specifically to understand where we stand in terms of our identity as a citizen of India, and also to understand whether it has to be necessarily in relation to that of Pakistan. We can possibly discuss the Citizenship Amendment Act and what could have been different. And there is a way forward which could also be imagined if at all one follows that the grounding of the Constitution is somewhere else, and that is not in the preamble. I haven't actually specified something about the preamble. as the Constitution of India is actually written in English, the terms sovereign, secular, socialist, democratic, republic, all these terms have no equivalence if we are to take the Western political thought as is. There were great efforts to try and Indianize them because the Constitution got written in English. There was a point that Dr. B.R. Ambedkar made about the democracy not present in India. And you find that, say, there was very staunch opposition to that thought. And one of the key points which was pointed out as part of the Constituent Assembly debates, I could possibly share those also with you. This is about the inclusion of the directive principles of state policy, the point on the establishment of panchayats, village panchayats in the country. So during that discussion, it was specifically pointed out that there is a temple in Uttaramerur in Tamil Nadu where there is a imagination of ballot box and also an election conducted. So there's a edict on the temple premises which has been referred to and stated that that which we actually call as something which is not there in India is something that also existed. So I'm not interested in the details of how this, what are the details of what were the responses given. But when we are looking at sense of past, we need to understand what are the kind of contours of thinking that actually went in terms of the kind of challenges posed and correspondingly the nature of responses that were given. So whenever a Britisher posed a point that you did not have it, the first response was, well, we too had it. Okay. So that is a phase in Indian past, which we need to understand. So some of the kind of writings which happened in the late 19th century of the Common Era carried a lot of reactions to the kind of charges which are posed on the Indians. And that way speaking, once this phase was over, that we stopped talking about reacting to it, then came the question of, if we did not have it in the same sense as the West, we had something else. How do we articulate it? Because we are no longer in the, or the nature of imagined society wanted to set aside many things of the past. So there is a memory that comes from the inheritance, and that memory is sought to be necessarily overcome because it is also felt that that memory comes with a baggage, and most of that baggage is something that could be discarded. Why was this sense of discarding came in? I'd certainly like to refer to a book. This is a book by Tīrtha Lakshman Shastri Joshi. Tīrtha Lakshman Shastri Joshi was a remarkable scholar. He was the editor of the largest exercise in the post-independent India. It started since the pre-independence days itself to compile all the Dharmashastras that have actually been there in the country. So he started compiling it. In fact, it was started by his guru, Swāmī Kevalananda Saraswati-ji, and they were all part of a group working from a place called Vai in Maharashtra. So I'll share these details to you in my summary mail. The point to be noticed is that Swāmī Kevalananda Saraswati-ji started this task of trying to bring together all the Dharmashastras, Dharma Sutras, and also the Nibandhana Granthas. India has had several Nibandhana Granthas, which were actually meant to be the kind of ways by which the then existent rulers could as well govern their respective kingdoms. So one example that I can take right away is Bhatta Lakshmidhara of Kashmir, who was a minister. He wrote a series of works called Kritya Kalpataru. And all these were actually published, and most of these publications happened since 1850 to 1950. So this shift in terms of, say, trying to collect, collate, and compile is another task which tried to show this is what we are. And Now that we have actually compiled these, how do we start thinking about, say, what to do with these in relation to where we are, where already a number of things have already formed some kind of a shape. So the ongoing politics also shape something. And here I'd certainly like to make a couple of points regarding the language that we use and the sense of politics. If at all one were to think of politics of the highest kind, it is actually politics of language. If you can alter the meanings of the common senses in which words are used, then you've actually achieved great change in the world. Has it happened very seriously? The answer is yes. And it is happening even now. And you might clearly notice that in language, we speak of terms which have etymological meanings, and there are also the meanings which are in vogue. That is, there are terms that are used by people in ways in which what they mean is what is actually understood by common people. For example, when people refer to the word religion, what the Constituent Assembly desired people to understand is that it is speaking of dharma. But because religion is used, you try and look at what religion means in the discourse in English and correspondingly make a great degree of effort to try and see how to patch these two things together. If instead you started with dharma itself, then to mean what is said in religion, which many people also did, then you have a case where what you speak is not possibly grasped by the other. So this is a schism that we haven't yet completely overcome, because there isn't yet a common sense in which the terms that we use and the kind of practice in which we see these terms in vogue has actually been bridged. So it is in this light that we must notice that the next section, which is the fundamental rights, and I've actually shared with you a write-up of Sri Tejasvi Surya, the Member of Parliament of Bengaluru South, on how he thinks that, say, the presence of Sita, Rama, Lakshmana on the illustration in the part 3 of the fundamental rights in the calligraphic edition of the Constitution of India matters. And he tried to portray that Rama was steadfast in terms of ensuring that people enjoy all rights. But whether what are the rights that are stated in the part 3 of fundamental rights, do they match with, say, what Rama would have actually learned as part of Dharma Shastra is a question. And further, even if one were to take it in terms of what grandmother of Durgadas thought of Ramraj of Malka, even there's a specific point that needs to be noticed. And here, under right to equality, there's a specific reference to prohibition of discrimination on grounds of religion, race, caste, sex, or place of birth, all of which, religion, race, caste, sex, place of birth, all these are specific reference to one's identity. So that a law should not be discriminative, specifically when it comes to, say, the establishment of what is just, and a judgment should not necessarily discriminate people on such grounds, makes for a general rule which makes very much good sense. But there are specific instances that you would find that there are exceptions to be noticed, and how does one take those exceptions forward is what actually shows the resilience of a society and also the wisdom of those people who are adjudicators. I'd like to state this as the last part of this particular session. The Article 17, which is on the abolition of untouchability. Untouchability is a term which hasn't been defined in the Constitution, is one of the most important parts of this Constitution. And this is something that you do not find in any other Constitution in any part of the world. Abolition of untouchability is something which is, in a sense, the crux and the defining feature of if I have to use the appropriate Sanskrit term for it, if one were to talk of the Lakshana of the Constitution of India, Lakshana is something that you say is very unique to something, not to be something that that which distinguishes one from the other. So if one were to speak of, say, many things that actually distinguish from the Constitution of India, of the Lakshanas, abolition of untouchability certainly would be part of it. Now, what is untouchability? We've actually seen, say, the point of outcast, an untouchable lady, sweeper that Durgadas spoke of, and the reference to casteism. And this is a point that requires due attention if we are to space our own understanding, because every kind of a talk of Ramayana or Mahabharata speaks of Varnashrama Dharma. And if one were to speak of Varnashrama Dharma, and today, if Varna is to be translated to be as a caste, and if society, the English definition of it, cannot actually have any scope of imagining Varnashrama Dharma, because Varnashrama did not exist in any society in the world except that of the Bharatiya existence. So that way, there are people who try to translate, say, Varnashrama Dharma as social polity. So we don't have, say, society to capture it. Society cannot express this. The word doesn't have the strength in it. And we don't have a native term for society in our languages also. We may use the term Sangha, Samaja, but if one were to try and look for the native histories of where these terms have been used in our own languages, we would not find it used in the same sense as the term society in English. So the moment we started using Samaja as a term, a very insightful professor who I have also referred to in my write-up on the course note, Professor Viśvaprasanna Pathak, has made a very insightful observation that when our own language does not have the capacity and the strength to express ourselves properly, then how can we expect an alien language to understand what we are? And he posed that we are actually in a search for identity. And this is specifically with respect to the writing of history, but I think it raises several questions which are relevant in our context of trying to talk of Rama Rājya. I'd certainly share that also as a reading. I hope that, say, the materials that I'm sharing, you're all reflecting on. In my note yesterday, I sent a specific exercise to celebrate. That's something which actually brings to the core about how can one indeed try and respond to the question of what we can do today in terms of bringing these to discussion. So we have some time, and I'd be glad to take questions or anything of this kind in between. Thank you.
Thank you, Pranavji. I think we have started a session, started the session 10 minutes late. So if everybody is okay, I think we are happy to give 10 to 15 minutes slot for question answers. Rajgaru, you may want to begin.
Yeah. I must say that Pranav Kumar is younger to me, but my namaskars to him because of his panditya. And I have seen the perspective of appreciative inquiry into the Indian Constitution. I have a few, I think one question I would like to say that, when we talk about our country, the Constitution says India, that is Bharat. Why they were not able to say Bharat, that was India? Whereas the Pakistan has given its name Pakistan, where Stan is actually a Sanskrit word. They were able to come out with their native name, but unfortunately, we being an ancient company called Bharat Desh, we were not able to give our own name to ourselves. Even today, we are referring to, even in this talk also, Pranav Kumar has been referring our country as India. Is there something wrong with the way we have thought about naming our country? You said very well, Nama is important, but our Nama has been distorted
thoroughly, and we say utter every time talking about our country, India, rather than Bharat, Bharat, Bharat. I'm sorry, this is the real fundamental flaw in our constitution.
I noticed that there are a few questions from the chat also. I'd first take Dr. IVNS Raju's point. Thank you, sir, for your blessings. I'd certainly want to address your point. You see, in English language, forget about, say, the constitution having to be seen as a political document. If you were to look at it as an English document, in English, we speak of connotation and denotation. And if you were to say A, that is B. A is the denotation and B is the connotation. So on that count, if I were to speak of India, that is Bharat, I am actually very happy. And I am very afraid that if you say Bharat, that was India, then you are actually saying that India existed in the past and Bharat exists in the present. And this kind of a thing would distort our understanding. But if you notice a translation of what happens to the Constitution of India in the Hindi version, which is also signed by the Constituent Assembly members, though it was not something which was which is considered even to this day as a standard version which can be used in the Supreme Court for interpreting the Constitution, it says Bharat Athva India. So there Bharat comes first and then India comes next. So India, that is Bharat, as such is a perfect use in my understanding, because A, that is B, means that the connotation needs to be taken as B, not A. So when I am actually using it with respect to the modern constitution, then India, that is Bharat, is something that we need not have complaints with. But the content of Bharat is something that we haven't yet completely addressed, which I'd certainly take it up when we look at the question of space and the descriptions of space. So the names that India has had, Bharat, Hindustan, India, each of these have a very significant kind of weight that is attached to it, and we shall certainly take it up when the time comes. So I hope this addresses the point that you made. And on the specific point about, say, where should India move to? I believe that, say, if India can move to being Bharat, then, say, we have accomplished the task of what is the unfinished agenda of the Indian national movement. It was Indian national movement. And now the point is, there are a few more points that I have to address. Say there is some question that I'll have to address as well. So now the point about Bharata, I'll give you a reference to the Purana where it also says is that Bharata is that country which is ruled by Bharata, and Bharata is that ruler who ensures that the Parama of all the people who are in that territory which is ruled by that ruler is the case. So that Prajabharana in a remarkable way is what makes us a territory Bharata, and such a ruler is Bharata. So this is a reflection that we certainly require to understand. And there are few important questions that are to be addressed. One by Swapna-ji. She asks, is it that the Rama Rājya was fulfilled to an extent during the early British Raj? You see, I have only referred to what is it that a specific accounting of that past has been made by a very important figure in the public space in the country, Durgadas. Now, if one were to talk of Rama Rājya and fulfilled to an extent during the early British Raj, I'm sure many people who are elderly, if one actually speaks to one's own grandfather, grandmother, they would actually say that India was much more honest in earlier days. During the British times, it was actually not as, say, selfish as we see it in the current times. And there are these memories, and people might as well say this is, as Durga has rightly pointed out, that it is some kind of a romance that people may have with yesteryears. But more importantly, the fact that, say, the Indian society, I'm actually forced to use the word society because the sense in which, say, caste consciousness that you speak of is something that requires further understanding, because the term caste is not the same as varna. And this has been a big issue in itself. We have a term called kula, we have a term called jati. And what do these specific terms mean? So specifically, if I were to talk of kula, I should be able to speak of Gurukula. And Gurukula would mean Guru Nivasa, Guru Griha. So today, when there are scholars who would say that one cannot speak in public without reference to annihilation of caste, and if caste were to be understood as kula, then does it mean that we are actually annihilating our own home, our own house? That's the point that one has to reflect. And the caste consciousness in the last paragraph that is mentioned by Durgadas, more importantly, what Durgadas actually mentioned is that there was a spiritual sense in which people accepted what was actually the way in which things happened. And it is that spirituality which combined people together. And one point that we may not forget is that all the kind of castes which are present in a village, they had a collective task, which is the performance of a yajna. That reference to the yajna, so long as it is there in the consciousness of people, you know what are the kinds of ways and means by which various castes would interact amongst themselves. The moment that yajna bhavana is something that is no longer present, it actually becomes a question of who gets what and who gets to what extent. So there's no longer a sense in which you find the connect between these, the presences of one's own self. And then, of course, as Dr. Ambedkar pointed out, a den of localism, full of ignorance. That's the kind of village or a kind of a place that we would actually find the kind of environment to be. But this question, I hope, would be posed also when we speak in greater detail about identities. And that's something that I do intend to bring to your attention when we come to that. There are, of course, some very remarkable points about how this itself got shaped. That also requires attention. And there are some fine books. If you are interested, you might as well want to take a look at work. Dharampalji's work on caste is also important. And at the same time, there's a professor by name Nicholas Dirks, who has worked on a book called Castes of Mind, where he actually tries to trace the way in which we see what is modern caste is actually a gift that the British have left us with. And we need to as well understand that. We'll come to that and certainly say in future sessions. There's an important question of Srimati Sridevi Padaki. She says, how does a Muslim youth take it in particular? Take what in particular? I mean, if at all it is about what all I am saying right now, I'm actually said in certain talks with my Muslim friends as well. But key point to be noticed is that when we actually refer to each of these identities, there has been a kind of culture which is built, which is something that is a specific instance by which you find public-private separation that happened post-independence era. And separation is such that you speak about the gods, or you speak about your own devotion, if at all, at home. You wouldn't ever speak about it in public. In fact, you wouldn't want to actually sound like anybody else as having a specific identity in public. In public, you are an Indian, but in private, you can be a Hindu, you can be a Muslim, you can belong to, you can be a Brahmana, you can be a Kshatriya, you can be a Vaishya, or you can be any of the kind of Shudra clans that one might find. And if one notices that it's only, say, 40 or 50 years post-independence that we find the self-assertion started from who are referred to by the constitution as the scheduled castes. When you find the Bahujan Samaj movement came about in the country, it actually tried to assert itself by saying we are this. And this happening is something that was certainly a shock to many people, because it was not actually following that public-private separation. But then now in the current times, when we have technologies which have altered the sense in which public and private have been understood or constituted, where do we have to move to is a question that needs to be understood. And in fact, in Islam, public-private separation cannot be made. That was the argument on the basis of which Pakistan as an idea was posed. So if one were to seriously understand, say, what was Sir Muhammad Iqbal's objection to the takeover of the undivided India by the Indian National Congress, it was basically the public-private separation, which the Indian National Congress leaders have come to accept as a kind of a maryada, which he says, if a Muslim does so, then he ceases to be a Muslim. If this interests you, then I'll be very glad to discuss, say, what Sir Muhammad Iqbal has tried to actually state, because that forms a very important part of our own understanding of where we are. Calligraphic edition of the Constitution of India, download it from the link is not happening. No, you actually have to go to the link there, and from there you get to download it. So it is put up on World Digital Library. I've actually given the link to the World Digital Library itself. So please write to me in person, Shri Kumar. I can as well send that link to you. I don't think, say, I've given a wrong link there. So if there are any further questions, we can as well take them up. And then on the specific question about, say, can you please elaborate on Muhammad Iqbal if you have time? Yeah, sure. See, Sir Muhammad Iqbal, if you have heard of him, of course, I'm sure, say, you would have heard of this famous song, Sare Jahan Se Acha, Hindustan Hamara, Hum Bulbule Hai Isake, Ye Gulsita Hamara, is a song written by Sir Muhammad Iqbal. And Sir Muhammad Iqbal came from a Kashmiri Pandit family, and he had this memory. He always used to say, we are Kashmiri Pandits. And he believed that if at all there is the best kind of Islam that can actually be found in the world, then such a kind of Islam is to be found in India. So Sir Muhammad Iqbal is somebody who also very, about public and private identity. Well, of course, see, the public-private identity separation happened because of the secular and sacred separation, which is peculiar to the European context. I'll share the speech that he gave to the All India Muslim League, which is today considered as the kind of first time when the idea of Pakistan was floated. This was in the 1929-30, when that was also the time when there was Purna Swaraj, and there was, on the other hand, this All India Muslim League, as the lead speaker, as the presidential address, Sir Muhammad Iqbal, who was then actually working on a book which he delivered as lectures. These lectures are called as Reconstruction of Religious Thought in Islam, and that to this day happens to be one of the best works in English on the Islamic political thought and Islamic philosophic thought. So if one were to understand, say, Islamic religion, and amongst the Islamic philosophers of the 20th century Common Era, one cannot miss the works of Sir Muhammad Iqbal. I'd possibly share some of his writings as well, because they are all relevant in terms of what we get to see in this course. So I hope I've addressed all the points which are actually made in this. If there's anything that I've missed, then I'd be glad to take up, if you can mail them to me.
Okay. Thank you, Pranavji.
Dr. Raju has raised his hand. So I think, Dr. Raju, please go ahead.
No, I have not raised. I think I rose it actually, and subsequently I raised it. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Pranavji. We have completed the second session. We will meet again in the next week, and I'll send the details of login time and the ID. If you have any more questions or any more you want to discuss more about the topics discussed in today's session, please write to Pranavji. All of you have his email ID. I think we can continue this discussion. It's more of a self-reflection, introspectory. There are a lot of readings that we have to do before, to come to the next session. There are multiple sources available. If you can ping Pranavji, he will be able to guide through the readings. With this note, on this auspicious day of Madhvanavami, we seek the blessings of Ananda Tīrtha, Bhagavad Pada, and we conclude this session. Sarve bhavantu sukhinah, sarve santu niramayah, sarve bhadrani paschyantu, ma kaschid dukkha bhag bhavet. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hari Om. Om Tat Sat. Namaste.
Dhanyavadaha.
Thank you.